Okay, so we've now gone analog. Episode 7 of the Pitt Season 2 has just been released, and following the big boss being called down to the floor, we found out the root cause of the issues that was causing Westbridge's patients to be diverted. They had a cyber attack, and it wasn't only holding Westbridge at ransom, but it was also holding Dominion Hospital too, and with Pittsburgh Trauma Medical Center being targeted on several occasions, the only way to defend against it was to shut everything down and plunge themselves into the Dark Ages. On the 4th of July holiday weekend, chaos is definitely about to ensue even more. So with that, let's dive into the episode, discuss the new revelations that were made about Dr Al-Hashimi, her past and its connection to baby Jane Doe, the sensitive subject matter surrounding Ilana, how well it was handled in the show, and also the confidence deflator that Dr Robby served up to Langdon. Here is the Pitt Season 2 Episode 7 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The Ending Explained. When it came to the ending of this episode, we saw that the big boss from the C-suite was brought down, CEO Trent Norris. Dr Al-Hashimi was called up to him and to IT to discuss what had been going on and the reason behind why the influx of patients were flooding in. It turned out that Westbridge was part of a cyber attack and there was a ransom that the attackers were wanting in order for the hold that they had to be relieved. Pittsburgh Trauma Medical Center had been targeted several times, but their IT protections had been able to prevent them from taking hold. This meant that the hospital was gonna go dark and shut down the system so that they were off-grid and essentially couldn't be targeted. This also meant that there'd be no phones, no computers, and no tech whatsoever, something which was gonna plunge the hospital into even more chaos. Whilst there's gonna be chaos on the floor, we also saw that there was friction that was building between Dr Al-Hashimi and Dr Robby because he was left out of the conversations on what the next steps should have been regarding the attack. Dr. Robby asked Trent Norris if there was anything that he should know before he presented to the wider group, and with him being told no, but later finding out that Dr. Al-Hashimi was consulted about the situation and he wasn't brought into it, it frustrated him. She had experience in dealing with cyber attacks, so it makes sense as to why she was called up, but at the same time, I can understand why Dr. Robby would feel like he was being undermined within his position. This just ultimately ties into the fact that he has a deep-rooted connection to the Pit, the people, and he doesn't truly want to go on his sabbatical. The Pit is where his purpose lies, where his family is, and without it, I think he'll feel relatively empty. Plus, I also feel like he's worrying that when he returns, Dr. Al-Hashimi might have changed things for the worse, as we've seen her already trying to do. Tension is going to be running high as all of the information on the patients, the ability to communicate with each other is going to be restricted, and the disagreements that they often have will almost likely be amplified. Ilana's experience with Dana. Ilana was the patient in the episode that was a victim of SA, and within this episode, I thought the handling of her experience of being examined following her going to the ER was something that was handled really well. We saw Ilana's mind racing on many different occasions, whether it be due to the uncomfortable and clinical nature of what she was having to go through with all of the different examinations. And then, sadly as well, the guilt that she felt because the person that assaulted her was who she believed was her friend, and she feared the repercussions that would go their way and how her friends might look at her differently due to what happened. There was a coldness to the entire procedure, like there was this dark cloud hanging over every scene that was featured, but it makes sense because of the seriousness and the severity of the situation. Every step of the procedure, despite it being necessary, you could see where the patient could feel like they were reliving every moment of it all over again. It's an invasive procedure that exposes somebody in a physical and mental sense in every way, so it really brought to light just how difficult it is. The silence in that room that allowed us to focus on the conversation that was contrasted to the chaotic nature outside was a way of allowing these small scenes that would appear often to hold the weight and power that they needed to really make a statement. There was one scene in particular that I thought was extremely sad, and it was the one where Ilana started removing her clothing. The look on both Dana, Emma, and Ilana's face showed just how horrific the entire situation was. One moment that I thought was handled really well was the way that when it came to Ilana telling her story of what happened to Dana, it cut away and we never found out what actually happened to her. As the audience, we didn't need to know what specifically happened, we just saw the aftermath and the pain that Ilana was going through. Everybody who sadly experiences something like this and goes through something as traumatic as this owns that story, and it's theirs to share if they want to. So the fact that we didn't hear it felt like she was being given that privacy, respect, and understanding. I also thought that in having Dana being the person that was carrying out the examination, the nurse that has been told time and time again that she has the hard exterior with the gooey center, she was the perfect choice. We saw her sympathizing with Ilana and trying to make her as comfortable as possible the entire time. I thought the scene where she went to touch her to comfort her but withdrawing due to knowing that she couldn't quite touch her because of what she'd been through because it could have been triggering was something that was caught on camera and was small but powerful. Dana breaking down when Ilana felt like she wanted to withdraw her claim was a moment that really stood out to me. Within real life, it's difficult enough for people to get convicted of this crime. Within the USA, it's said that out of 1,000 assaults that take place, only 310 are reported to the police, and from there it's suggested that between 0.7% to 5.7% result in a felony conviction, so I feel like Dana's face represents the tragedy that this actually is. Dr Langdon and Dr Robby. Oh, did anybody else feel the tension in that elevator? When Dr. Robby went up to receive the patient that was being flown in following the boating accident, it was the loudest I'd ever heard silence. Dr. Langdon had been trying to reach out to Robby and apologize to him as part of his process of recovery, but Robby had been actively avoiding him. The way the camera was just panning from left to right with the both of them not saying a single word to each other really did capture that awkwardness. Dr. Langdon did apologize to Robby when they were on the roof, apologizing for betraying him, for betraying his patients, and he said how he'd hoped that he'd forgive him. This was where Robby then said, "I'm glad that you got the help that you need, but I don't know if I want you working in my ER. I'm not gonna lie, I was really surprised by that, but I suppose it makes sense as to why Dr. Robby had been avoiding him. This was something that impacted Langdon's headspace greatly, and we saw that when they returned down to the floor and were dealing with the patient, he couldn't quite make a decision because all Langdon could think about was how Dr. Robby didn't actually want him there. When Langdon then tried to speak with Dr. Robby after, Robby returned to his previous state from before where he was just avoiding him as much as possible. So it feels like the first blow has been delivered by Robby, and we're going to see Langdon return with a blow, and it could well end up erupting into something far larger than what we've seen. What's going on with Dr. Al-Hashimi? There was a moment in this episode where we saw that Dr. Al-Hashimi went within her mind as Dr. Javadi was speaking with Jackson's parents about the fact that he was hearing voices and was being held for psych evaluation. She froze, walked into the bathroom, and called the Pittsburgh Neuroscience Group and asked for the next available appointment. This showed us that Dr. Al-Hashimi has some mental health obstacles herself that she's overcome in the past and is continuing to overcome. The look that she had on her face was one that reminded me of the ending to episode 1 and the beginning of episode 2 where she was looking at the baby that had been brought in and she just froze. I actually think all of this could be connected to the conversation that she had with Dr. Abbot after they'd worked on the SWAT team member that was brought in following the injuries that he sustained. During her conversation with Dr. Abbot, she mentioned how she spent time in the Middle East in Kabul with Médecins Sans Frontières, which is a non-profit that works specifically in zones of conflict, and she also said that in 2020 she worked at the maternity hospital. It was said that she had war stories, and I think with her being in zones of conflict, her mental health would have definitely been impacted, and with her also speaking about working in the maternity hospital, it showed that the look that she had on her face when she first saw baby Jane Doe could have transported her back to there. So I imagine that's something that we'll come to learn about as the episodes go on. The other patients. The influx of patients that we were seeing in this episode really brought to light just how overrun they were. However, there were a couple of experiences that I thought were worth speaking about. The first was Roxy and her decision to book a bed inside of the hospital rather than returning home. She came to that decision because she felt like she was becoming a burden to her family and that the family home was essentially becoming a hospital room, and she didn't want that. She wanted it to be a place where everybody could be comfortable, and she didn't like the idea of her family living in a house of ghosts after she'd passed away, and it's a difficult situation to be in. Obviously, her family doesn't feel that way, but she would get the best care possible while staying in a hospital. So the emotions that were present from her husband in struggling to come to terms with it, but also Dr. McKay and Robby with them also welling up because they were watching a family struggling, were just seeping through the screen. Then the final patient I want to discuss was Orlando. With Orlando, we're seeing the struggles that many people go through that can't afford their medical bills, and as we saw, he fled the hospital because he knew that every minute that he was there, the dollar signs were just increasing. This is a situation that's actually ridiculous because your health should always be a priority, and it's saddening that people put their health at risk because they worry about the financial burden that it causes to themselves and their family. Dr. Mohan did warn him that he should stay put, but he didn't listen, and it's now making me wonder if we could end up seeing him back in the ER before this season comes to an end. My review of the episode. I thought this was a really interesting episode in the show. We saw the chaos developing as the episode went on, with more of the diversions being brought in. But that contrasted with Ilana's story, which was in complete silence, allowing it to feel like it had its own space and like we were in that separate room with them. I just thought that whole section was handled really well and it stood out to me. Even though it's Dr. Robby's last day, he's not afraid of falling out with anybody, and I love it because it's adding to the drama. Whether it be Dr. Langdon or Dr. Al-Hashimi, we're seeing him just speak his mind, and it makes great TV. I do think my favourite scene in the episode was when Dr. Langdon and Robby were in the elevator together. It was just so tense and awkward, but funny at the same time. However, what I will say is that he's not afraid of dishing out compliments either. When he complimented Mel, her reaction was my reaction, and it made my heart melt. Mel is such a great character, and with her deposition coming up, you could tell that he knew that she needed to hear that. Now, I loved how during this episode, we finally got some clarity on Dr. Al-Hashimi's past and how it was connected to small moments that have impacted her in the present day. It feels like she's starting to become more of a fleshed out character, and I'm beginning to understand her just that little bit more, so I reckon by the end of the season, maybe Dr. Robby will too. In order to capture the sheer chaos in this episode, this one just felt like a continual flow state where we were going from patient to patient, and it was almost like the camera never stopped rolling. It added a sense of immersion there, but paired with the busy waiting room, the constant sweat that was on the doctors, nurses and patients, it felt like we didn't stop for an hour. Now that we're halfway through the season, with all systems being shut down and them going analog, I'm really excited to see how the story's going to develop and the now added chaos that we're going to be seeing. So, there you have it, the Pitt Season 2 Episode 7 Ending Explained. If you want to see more videos on the Pitt Season 2, then check the playlist below, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. I'm breaking down every episode in the season. What did you think of this episode? Share your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for tuning into the video, and I'll see you in the next one.